Hello everyone. This video was a request that somebody had a couple weeks ago, and they were basically saying, I'm having a little bit of trouble with turboprops. What's the easiest way to land them? And today we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the different techniques, as well as the most basic system for landing this one. In this first video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the single-engine Cessna 208, which is a really solid plane for this purpose, because we know that we can go ahead and use this relatively effectively. Let's go ahead and climb in and take a look at the things we're going to be interested in. The first thing we're going to be interested in is going to be our airspeed. Knowing how fast we're going is going to have a massive impact on our ability to land this airplane. Basically, when we're running a final approach, we need to always make sure that we're going to be in a situation where airspeed is in the acceptable range. If you get too slow, you run the risk of a stall. If you get too fast, you're going to end up consuming significantly more runway than you probably had intended. Now, whenever you're using the Cessna 150, or I should say the Cessna 208, I should be more careful there, we want to make sure our initial speed, like if we're in a traffic pattern or something, is going to be right around 150 knots, of course, depending on what kind of traffic you have ahead of you. Keep in mind, once you get to 150 knots, that's going to be also our speed we're going to need to do for the purposes of taking a look at the different flaps. Now, this particular aircraft, when you take a look at the POH, it recommends landing with full flaps whenever possible. You can use less than full flaps if you run yourself into a situation, for example, where there's some kind of extreme wind or something, or it's bouncing around, it's just too difficult. So our flap lever right here, if you actually take a look down, you're going to notice that the first set of flaps is 10 degrees. We can basically deploy pretty much whenever we want to. However, the takeoff flaps, flaps 20, has to be in an airspeed of 150 knots indicated or less. In this case, I'm doing about 149, so I can go ahead and bring in that first notch of flaps right away. Once we do that, we're going to continue reducing speed until we get to 125 knots. At 125, we're going to go ahead and drop our last notch of flaps by going down, down, down like this, and then we're going to be setting up our approach speed. Now, the approach speed in this aircraft is completely dependent on how much you weigh. So in this case, if I take a look at my main fuel load right here, you can see I've got about 38%. It's been a pretty long flight today, and you can see I have a total payload ranging right around about, let's see here, payload, we're looking at about 717 pounds. So currently, my takeoff maximum everything weight is about 6,700 pounds is my current weight, and of course, I can't exceed 8,800. Now, if you want to think about this another way, if I were to empty all of my payload and then empty my fuel to, let's say, we'll put it down to 1%, you can see my weight would be about 5,100 pounds. So basically, for every 1,000 pounds, you got to add yourself another 5 knots onto your approach speed. So I'll go back up to my 38. I'll go ahead and bring up about 20%, I think we said it was. So you can see about 67. So my approach speed is going to be right around 80 knots or so. 85 if you are completely maximum weight, and 75 if you're absolutely minimum weight. But given the flight model and flight sim, and depending on what the temperature is, you might have some other little changes with it. So our initial speed we're going to be interested in, and obviously you can see this aircraft is slowing down. I'm currently on freeze because unfortunately what had just happened is my engines shut themselves off on account of the fact that it just completely drained the fuel tanks in the 2 moments that it took me basically to do that demonstration. So let me go ahead and get that going and we'll continue. Now, one nice thing about this aircraft is we can actually take that value of 80 knots and dial that into our speed tape here. To do that, come down to timer ref, go ahead and press in the navigation cursor. We'll make our way all the way down to where we want to go ahead and put it in, and we'll go dial it in right now. So in this case, I'm going to use my VR as that reference. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the next button here. Go ahead and change that to the on position, enter. Go ahead and close that out and shut off my timer and ref. Now, as we approach our speed, we're going to have a little speed bug to remind us exactly what speed we're supposed to be coming in at. Now, another quick trick and a nice way to do this as well is we can actually go over to the flight level change mode, and we can actually sit here and tweak our vertical speed until we get the value that we actually desire. In this case, I'm not going to worry about that too much. Now, one of the things you probably notice is we're coming here at pretty much right at the tip of dusk, and the reason we're doing that is because runways tend to be better lit at this time of day, making it a little bit easier, but we can still see the physical surface of the runway itself. So now we've gone ahead, we've calculated our speeds, we know we're going to be approaching at about 80 knots. We know that our airspeed is 125, which is the speed we're going to need for the next notch of flaps, so I'm actually going to dial that in right away. And now we can start getting ourselves close to our final approach speed of between 85 and 75 knots. So go ahead and unpause everything. Go ahead and reset my view, and we'll just go climbing in here. Now, for my initial approach, what I'm going to actually do is hold the same altitude that I started at. Now, the reason for that is if you look at the end of the runway, you can start to see those teeny little white lights start to change color on me. Now, when I have 2 whites and 2 reds, that's going to tell me that it's going to be the appropriate time to start making my approach down to the ground, and that I'm on about a 3% glide path or so. 3 degrees, rather, not 3%. I was thinking grade, my bad. All right, I can see 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and reduce my throttle even more and begin my descent. Now, one thing I notice right now is I'm starting to get pulled around just a teeny tiny bit because of the incredible amount of turbulence and wind that we have kind of at our disposal right now. Go ahead and make sure my automatic pilot is switched off, which it is, and we're going to start making our way down to our speed, which we can see marked. So what we're basically going to do here is maintain our 80 knots all the way until we get to just about 10 feet off the ground. So there's my speed right there. I'm just going to go ahead and adjust the nose just a teeny tiny bit. Now, one of the tough things about a turboprop is that our engine responds very slowly. Now, looking out the front windshield, I can see the fact that I'm noticing that I've got an extra red. Now I'm back up to white again, which means I'm back on glide path. The trick here is, of course, if you start to see too much red, just go ahead and push your throttle forward just a teeny tiny bit and just kind of hold it exactly where it was a moment ago until you see that white light come back on, telling you you're right back on glide path. So in this case, I'm working out to be about 82, 83 knots is keeping me perfect without having to do any nose adjustments. Now, the POH for the 208 says that whenever you're landing this aircraft, you're always supposed to land this aircraft in such an attitude that your tail is slightly low. So in order to make sure we maintain that, when we get close to the ground, we're going to have to make sure we flare fairly smoothly. Obviously, we don't want to strike the tail either. So at this point, we have a bit of a crosswind coming in too, so I'm just going to go ahead and fly a little bit of a crab angle. I am just slightly off. Go ahead and pause everything for everybody for a moment so I can go ahead and light ththings up a little bit for you so you can see exactly what's going on. That looks pretty good. Yeah, we can use probably just a little bit more light. I don't want to do too much, otherwise it's going to be in our face. There we go. Let's go ahead and unpause. And we're going to continue our approach. Looking pretty good. We're a little off the glide slope, but that's intentional. I'm also noticing I'm picking up quite a bit of extra speed here. I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle back and start getting closer to our original approach speed. All right, smoothly apply. Remember, with the turboprop, the engine is very slow to respond. So when you're making an adjustment, you've got to give it time to change before you start making a counter adjustment. Whoop, looks like I'm starting to get a little bit low there. I'm just going to go ahead and apply just a little bit more throttle, and I'm just going to wait to see exactly what its response is going to be. So again, I can still see that I've got that extra 3 reds and 1 white, means we're a little low. Any moment now, and yeah, we're back in business again. It's just a matter of applying just a teeny tiny bit of throttle. All right, so our target point here, I'll go ahead and pause for just a second, is going to be this large mark right here. So if you imagine, when we cross the threshold of this runway, we're going to be about 50 feet off the ground. Our goal is to make our back 2 tires smack directly into this. Because we are relatively light, however, when we do get down, don't be surprised if we start to float just a little bit and end up smacking this end here. Naturally, we could aim for the big 2.7 as opposed to our touch point here, but whenever you're working with these lights, remember these lights are connected here, they're not connected here. So that's a common mistake that people make when they're trying to use them. They end up flying much too low. Let's go ahead and repause there. All right, nice and simple. We're going to hold ourselves. Again, we're trying to land right at that spot. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come down. I'm going to go ahead and pause again. Whoop, that's not a pause button. The button we're now interested in is going to be our radar altitude. This tells us how far off the ground. Remember, our radar altitude here is also going to be a function of what our angle is. As the angle of the plane increases, our radar altitude will actually show you an improper value. So it's important you consider this. Also, at a radar altitude of 0, that doesn't mean you're on the ground. That means you went through the ground. So kind of keep that in the back of your head as well whenever you're doing any sort of approaches. Unfortunately, because it took all this time to go ahead and pause and unpause everything, you're going to run into a situation where you're going to be scrambling to grab back onto the controls. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue coming down. We're going to go ahead and smoothly reduce the throttle and then lift the nose up, keeping our tail ever so slightly low. Again, I'll make sure all my positioning is all set. My head's in the right spot. My airspeed is a little bit slow, but that's going to be perfectly fine for our purposes. Smoothly reduce the throttle to 0. Lift the nose up, and now we're just going to wait for the back 2 tires to come down. And there we are. We are on the ground. Hold the nose up for just a moment and smoothly bring the nose downward, and now we're completely in business. Had I not paused to show you where the radar altitude is, that would have been a little bit smoother of a landing, but like I said, you're kind of fighting Microsoft at that point. Now, one of the great things about this aircraft is we do have a thrust reverser on board, so we can actually press the thrust reverse button and jam the whole airplane in reverse. Of course, when we do this, we create a tremendous amount of noise, and it's fairly effective, except for the fact it sucks things back into our propeller, so you want to be very cautious with that. So I'm going to go ahead and release the reverser, set everything back to normal, give myself just a teeny body thrust, and we're going to go ahead and make our way over to the final. Hopefully this video was helpful. Next time we'll go ahead and take a look at landing something that's a little bit larger, where the concept is going to be exactly the same, just the speeds are going to be very different. Enjoy.